All right. Hello again. This is Lauren Seimpoli with Junior Achievement. I am here with Mr. Chris Kolakowski, who is the director of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, formerly the director of the MacArthur Memorial in downtown Norfolk. So that's his connection to Hampton Roads. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So did you always want to be a museum director when you grew up?
No, I always wanted to do something with history.
I'd be surprised if you said yes.
Yeah, it's
Some
nobody.
people, I don't know.
Actually, I've had this conversation with some people before, and I've learned along the way that you don't plan your career too definitively. Don't try to angle for just one job.
Sure.
And my thing always was I wanted to do something with history, whether it was just write, whether it was work in museum, whatever, teach, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lot of hard work and a little bit of luck, I ended up where I am.
That's awesome. So I mean, was there something that like sparked like your interest in history? I mean, I was also that kid, so I can relate. But maybe for some of our students who are into other things, like what was the moment where you're like, this is awesome?
My parents were the ones who kind of really interested. We'd go to museums as a kid. We'd go to historic sites. I grew up in Fredericksburg, actually. And so when you grow up in a town like that with that much history dating back to the colonial period, it's kind of hard not to at least be aware of this thing called history. And they really kind of encouraged me. And one of the things that really I hooked onto was the stories. One of the historians I admire the most, David McCullough, said once, he said, a lot of times history is taught as dates and names. You learn the king died, then you learn the queen died. Okay. But he says, when you say the king died and then the queen died of grief, that's a story.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings it much more to life. And so that's kind of where that came from.
Okay. So could you tell us a bit about your job with the Veterans Museum?
I'm the director of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, which is the state military museum for the great state of Wisconsin. And actually, I have relatives that are Wisconsin veterans dating back to the Civil War. So this is partly my family history. We started in 1899 as the GAR Memorial Hall, Grand Army of the Republic Memorial Hall, the Veterans Hall, basically, in the state capitol, and then moved across the street to our current facility in 1990. But we tell the story of all Wisconsin veterans from the Civil War all the way up to the present, all branches, all conflicts. It's a fascinating scope of things to work with. And I'm the director. I've got a staff of 24 people. We average about 90,000 visitors a year, and it's just a fantastic group of professionals to be working with to move forward and tell some great stories.
Excellent. So can you tell us where you went to college, what your major was, all that good stuff?
I went to Emory and Henry College, which I know most people in your audience probably are like, where's that? It's down near Bristol.
In Virginia, guys.
Bristol and Abingdon. Yes, it is. It's almost to Tennessee. It's 25 miles shy of the Virginia-Tennessee border. But I went there, did history and mass communications, a double major undergraduate. And then in 2002, I'd gotten to the point in my career where I realized where I wanted to go, which was to be a chief historian or a museum director or something like that, where I wanted to go in terms of museums and historic sites management. I needed a graduate degree. And so I went in 2002 and got a graduate master's in public history from the State University of New York in Albany.
Okay. All right.
That's how, and then from there.
Yeah. Well, and I understand, obviously, can you tell us a little bit about your time in Norfolk, just to bring in the local aspect a little bit?
Sure. I was director of the MacArthur Memorial from September of 2013 until December of 2019. So basically last December, so 6 years and a few months. Mm-hmm. I got there just before we had the 50th anniversary of the MacArthur Memorial in April of 2014, 50th anniversary of General MacArthur's death and the de facto dedication. And then all the way worked a lot of projects, including World War I Centennial, World War II 75th anniversary things, a lot of different projects and programs. And I was really proud of what we were able to do to grow the place and really get some great things done.
Yeah, we're at that point in the timeline where a lot of significant anniversaries are coming up. So you've got a lot to be celebrating, I guess.
celebrating and commemorating. And one of the things I always tell people is anniversaries are a great opportunity for you to re-engage and re-energize your audience because it shows you're relevant. You know, one of the things that we talk about, and I've talked about with the team up here, we talked about at the MacArthur Memorial, is so what? You know, it's great to have this kind of history, but okay, so what?
Sure.
And if I can, I'll give you an example,
please,
of how you make it relatable.
Yeah.
Is a lot of times people are talking about, you know, anniversary, what have you. But sometimes you don't have an anniversary to hook on. But the idea is always find a hook and start where the audience is. You know, in case it might be an anniversary, it might be something else. In this case, the example I'll give you is a concept. We were doing an exhibit at the memorial in 2015 for the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Philippines. And it was originally we were looking at kind of, okay, we'll just do a history exhibit. But you know, we started thinking about it and we said, you know, how many people would really come and just say, oh, the liberation of the Philippines, oh, that's nice, you know. But then we came up with a title and a big idea. It's Keeping the Promise. MacArthur in 1942 had said, I shall return. He made a promise to the Philippine people. And the fact that we kept that promise and liberated the Philippines, being the only colonial power in the Pacific to do that, by the way, before the end of World War II, goes a long way to explaining why we're a trusted partner in Asia today for so many Asian countries. When you put it in those terms,
yeah,
that gets people interested.
Right.
And I guess that's one of the things, that's one of the points I'm trying to make, is that through anniversaries, through different concepts, you take history and you make it relatable to the audience today.
Sure.
And you start with where the audience is, what they know, what they're thinking, and then you go backwards. I used to tell school groups that Arthur MacArthur's field desk, this big wooden box that had papers and folders and stuff in it, I said, that's his smartphone 115 years ago.
Yeah.
And you could see kids go, oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Right.
You know, or did you know MacArthur was a baseball fan? Did you know he was a football fan? Well, here's his signed football, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, again, making it relatable.
I think that's, yeah, we have that in common. Like, you know, junior achievement programming, my classes, what you're doing at various museums around the country. Like, yeah, if there's no buy-in, what's the point? And I think, you know, we're in an interesting cultural moment with things like the musical Hamilton, and like, you know, it's getting kids interested in American history because it made it relevant and interesting. So very similar to what you're doing, which is really cool.
Well, the 1918 flu, you see how many people are, you know, with this coronavirus thing, are looking back to the 1918 flu.
Yes.
And saying, see, we've done it at the museum here. We've done a couple things on social media about Madison during the 1918 flu when they shut down. The state of Wisconsin shut down for 45 days.
Sure.
And so it's like, hey, we've done this before. You know, that's a way to make history relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. There are parallels, but also differences between then and now. Obviously, like they didn't know what viruses were the last time this happened. So yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So making the way down my magic list of questions. I think my lawn people are here, so pardon the background noise. So, do you think you're good at your job? I mean, I think you're good at your job, but what do you think?
Well, thank you for that. Everybody thinks they're good at their job. I hesitate to answer that question yes or no, because here's the thing that I believe strongly in, is the moment that I think I know everything, the moment that I think, you know, I've got it all put together, the moment I stop learning and growing and developing, is the moment that I cease to be as effective as I can be at my job.
Sure.
And so, you know, if you ask me that question, it'd be like, well, you know, I guess people seem to like what I'm doing and what I'm bringing to the table, but at the same time, I can identify areas I need to grow. There are things I need to do to improve. There are things that I need to pay attention to. So I never want to get complacent. Sure. About my performance.
I agree that that's important.
But thank you for the compliment anyway.
Absolutely. You know, gotta get that in there. So is there anything that you struggle with, or you're like, I need to work on? You just mentioned, you know, just something, I don't know, that you want to improve on.
One of the biggest things is whenever you start a new organization, or start in a new organization, I should say, particularly a big bureaucracy like the state of Wisconsin.
Sure.
And I found this when I went to Norfolk because I came from a job working as a civilian for the United States Army. So I had all this training. I had the federal government did things, procurement, HR, all those different processes that you need to know to manage and run your programs and lead your teams. I call it being a better bureaucrat, for lack of a better term. I had to learn how Norfolk does that.
Right.
And all those details. And there's a lot of things that are similar, but there are things that are different.
Yeah.
And also learning who the people are and who you need to call and for questions or help or things like that. Well, that's probably the biggest thing I'm doing right now is learning how the state of Wisconsin does things.
Sure.
And what's expected of me and what's the processes and the standards and things like that.
Right.
And so that's kind of one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I think that's with any job. Like you get in, you're excited, like, all right, you're going to do the thing, going to change the world, which yes, like you can. But that first year is just, where are all the things?
Yes.
And, I think I can speak from experience. I'm sure you can speak from experience that it's hard because sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and you're trying to learn all the things, and it can be frustrating and intimidating. But as long as you're, like you said, willing to continue learning, you can certainly be successful.
Exactly. And that's the approach you have to take. Because it's, as I tell people, bureaucracy is what it is, and no matter what organization it's in, you're going to have an element of it. But at the end of the day, you need to find out I know what I need to do and what I want to do. What are the processes and steps that I need to learn and use to do what I need to do?
Mm-hmm. I think that's good advice. Which leads me to our next question. What advice would you give to somebody who's looking for a career in a similar field?
I would, in the museum field, and this is true of several places, particularly if you're doing something like what you guys do with JA.
Sure.
There are certain sectors where, and I'll use the museum and history field because that's the one I know the best. I actually gave this lecture once to a bunch of Emory and Henry students, and I said there are two realities that you need to know. The first one is you're going to work for government or nonprofit pretty much your whole life. That's a reality of the situation, and just go with it. Mm-hmm. Second thing is for a lot of career fields, not just mine, but I can think of media. I can think of a lot of career fields. There are a lot of career fields where to move up, you have to move. Mm-hmm. I did to move up from where I did. After graduate school, I did 6 state-to-state moves in 9 years. Wow. That was fast.
Yeah.
But even then, I moved from a museum in Kentucky to a museum in Norfolk, from a museum in Norfolk to another museum halfway across the country in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Those are realities. And every career field has its own realities. Sure. It may not be quite that dramatic. Understand that, go in with eyes open and realize what you need to do. And then the other thing I'd say as well is, particularly for folks who are starting at the lower ends of the career ladder, pay your dues, and the lessons that you learn there, you will draw upon throughout the rest of your career.
Yeah.
What I learned I work in the front desk at a national park for 8 years at the Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania Battlefield Park, and then a year at Saratoga, another year on top of that at Saratoga. What I learned about frontline operations, interacting with the public, giving tours, that fundamental public contact work, frontline, literally as frontline as you can be.
Yeah.
I draw on every day as a museum director. And
sure.
I'd like to think it makes me a better museum leader, because I understand what the front line is. I understand what it is to run a gift shop cash register, and what it is to be the public face. And I tell that to the frontline team. I told it in MacArthur. I tell it here. I said, you are a public face of, in that case, the city of Norfolk, in this case, the state of Wisconsin. We may be the only part of state government or city government that people, our visitors, interact with.
Right.
Let's leave them with a good feeling.
Experience. That customer service aspect I think is really important. And like you said, knowing what every member of your staff, what the person who works in the gift shop, who might be a college student or like a younger person, is dealing with, so you're able to communicate better with them because
Right.
you have an idea of their experience.
And I learned that by paying my dues and working my way up and doing what I need to do.
Right.
And it helps with them too, because sometimes I'll be having those conversations and say, hey, I used to do your job. I understand.
Yeah. There's
So,
that approachability, that relatability.
exactly.
In a recent talk that I did, we were talking about, like, it's cliche that, like, Rome wasn't built in a day, but, like, it didn't just fall out of the sky. Like, there was a process there. And it's the same thing with building a strong career. Excellent. So is there any advice that you might give your younger self? Because maybe somebody watching is your younger self.
I would tell my younger self, I would tell my younger self, this is a really good question. And I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this.
Sure.
I would tell my younger self that it's going to be okay.
Okay.
And things that seem to be important to you now, or you may think may be important in 6 months, may not be. It certainly won't be important in a year, 5 years. I go back and look at some of my emails and social media posts, and I look at something that I alluded to that was really a big deal at the time. And I look back and I'm like, sometimes I don't even remember what it was.
Yes.
That's how much my perspective has changed.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's easy for me to say that looking back. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20. I get that. But don't lose sight of the fact that sometimes what looks like it's a big deal at the moment, once you get 6 months, a year, 5 years, even further beyond, is not so much. And so just maintaining that perspective is what I would tell myself. And also, you'll be fine. It's going to be fine. Whatever happens, it's going to be fine.
Good. I think that's really relevant for some things that are happening right now. So we'll all be okay.
Yeah.
So we're in the advice section here. So what is the best piece of career advice you've received?
Ooh, I've received a lot of career advice. Probably the biggest. I'll probably give you a different answer every day, because every day it's a little bit different. And what I draw on is a little bit different. There's this, I hesitate to say standard, but there are the common ones out there about values, the importance of integrity, things like that. One of the biggest things that I find is when things go sideways, and I'll use a great example. I wasn't even 90 days on the job, and we had a closure order here in the state, and I had to quickly disperse my team and set up a dispersed operation. And what I did was it just reinforced what somebody told me once, is when in doubt, fall back on the process, fall back on the values, fall back on the fundamentals of the organization. In other words, why are we here? What are the priorities we need to do? In other words, what process are we following? And what do our values say?
Sure.
And if you rely on those three things, you'll be fine. And I sat in meetings with people, and we were talking, and some of them were real worried about certain things, going to work from home, and what was all this going to be? And it was either, we'll figure out the process, or here's the process I have from the secretary's office. I'm part of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Here's what the secretary's telling us. Here's what government's telling us. We are going to follow this guidance. This is our process. When in doubt, use this.
Right.
And that really helped organize everybody and get everybody moving in the same direction. Is when in doubt, and sometimes it was, let's wait for the guidance. I can ask that question. Let's wait for the guidance. Let's wait for the process, and then we'll follow that process. And that has really helped get through some of this concern.
Yeah. There's a local play in this area that I'm familiar with. There's a line where one of the characters is, "Stick to protocol, people." And I think you saw that show. And so similar, like, stick to protocol, like, we'll be fine. It'll be okay.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I like it. So in your career, I'm sure you've done some interviews, maybe hired some individuals. Do you have any memorable moments, what to do, maybe what not to do, from those experiences?
I've been on both sides of the interview, as you can imagine.
Yes.
The biggest thing is two things I would tell a potential candidate. First of all, who you know gets you to the door a lot of times.
Mm.
What you know gets you in and keeps you in. And so be confident in yourself. If you've got an interview, if somebody gives you an interview, it's an honest look. Get up there, take your turn at the plate, do the best you can. At the end of the day, that's what matters. Let them say no to you. You get up to the plate, you take your swings, and come what may, it'll be what it is. I will say this is when you present yourself, make sure you're presenting yourself in the best possible way. And that's different for everybody. Everybody, everybody's got their style, and that's fine. One thing that I would also suggest is a lot of the questions I ask and a lot of the questions I've been asked, if you can find the question they're asking behind the question, if that makes sense. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
When I interviewed for the job here, they asked me about budget. And they asked me about how you manage budget and the importance of managing a budget, things like that. And I knew what they were trying to ask is, do you basically be a good steward of your resources? Don't overspend. Don't be, throw all the money all
financially
around
responsible.
Like there's a bottomless pit. Yeah, be responsible, right?
Yeah.
And so I answered that question. And then I said, but there's another point to this as well. I said, it's not just that. It's when things are tight or when you're trying to create a new program or justify a program. I said, being able to, when it's budget time, like we're starting to put the state budget together for submission, the governor to put together for the end of the year. I said, being able to write those justifications and provide that information and advocate for your programs. I said, to me, that's another part of budgeting as well.
Yeah.
They didn't ask that question.
Right.
They didn't ask me about that.
Sure.
But that was also the question behind the question. Is not just can you do your columns, and your bottom line, your input, your output, that stuff. But being able to take it a little bit further and realizing it's not just the spreadsheet. There's more to it than that.
Right. And yeah, you took that opportunity to demonstrate your additional knowledge on the subject to let them know, like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. Have you ever asked or been asked, like, at the end of the kind of process, it's like, oh, do you have any questions for us? Like, do you have any advice on how to answer that question? Because I'm always like, you have to say something, I feel like you can't just be like, no, I'm good.
I always ask, what do you think the top 3 issues and or priorities are? I also have at least 1 or 2 questions that demonstrate that I've done due diligence and looked at what I'm doing or at what we're interviewing, what the organization is doing. And sometimes it's something as, I see what's the status on this, or it's, what, do you feel, it depends. It depends on the organization.
Sure.
Here I asked, what do you think the top 3 priorities are for the organization? And I asked, what are the 3? Actually, I asked the 2 questions. I said, what's the priorities and what do you think the challenges are? Because that gauges how they see themselves and how they see this position. If they have a plan or if they have an idea of what the position and what the person coming in is going to be expected to do, but also are they going to be expected to solve problems, put out fires? What are the expectations?
Yeah.
And it helps me get kind of a glance.
Okay.
And the other thing I'd say too is when you interview, I've interviewed over video, and that works. I mean, it's fine.
Sure.
But if you're sitting there and you arrive a little early and you're sitting there, listen. Pay attention to the dynamic of the team. Sometimes you can pick up more in 5 minutes sitting in a waiting room about an organization than you can in an hour-long interview.
Agree. I think as we are both calm people, so we pay attention to that kind of thing. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, being observant and always be early for your interview, guys.
Because remember, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. In fact, when I start my interviews, candidate sits in front of me. I say, For example, if I was interviewing and saying, Lauren, thanks for coming today. Just want to emphasize right off the bat, this is a conversation. This is as much for us to get to know you as for you to get to know us. And then I proceed to go through the process of what we're going to do. And then, we get into the interview questions.
Sure.
But I think it's important to start with that.
Yeah.
And recognize that the candidate is interviewing the organization as much as the organization is interviewing the candidate.
Yeah. Display your best selves on either side.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, you also want to make sure it's a good fit.
Right. Yeah. Personalities are important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how are you dealing with working from home currently? Since you just started the job, like, hello, everyone, I will see you in 3 months.
Yeah. I'm doing okay. I previously, when I was at Fort Knox, before I went to Norfolk, I worked for a command that was geographically dispersed. It was headquarters of Army Cadet Command, and it was oversaw all the ROTC programs around the country. And I was away from headquarters, so I spent a lot of time on video conference. Between that, email, and Microsoft Teams and some of the other applications, Zoom, things like that.
Sure.
We're keeping in touch. The big thing is being mindful. It's real easy to get isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually took a training when this thing first started. And one of the things one of the comments that was made was, don't make it about just tasks and deadlines. Check in with everybody. Don't forget the human element of it. And so instead of doing once a week staff meetings, we do twice a week now.
Okay.
And part of the point is some of it's business, some of it's just, hi, everybody, how you doing?
Right.
We'll talk about different things. A couple of sports fans, we all commiserate about the fact we don't have sports right now.
Yeah, yeah.
It should be baseball season. It should be the hockey playoffs, things like that. But that's the whole point, is to make it, to make it, remember that we're all people. And this will end.
Right.
But just recognize, and parents, unfortunately, I don't have any children in this scenario, I should say, because there are a lot of parents that are trying to school.
Yep.
They're trying to run school for their kids. They're trying to manage the house. They're trying to get their own work done. Some of them, I've got one employee who's got father just moved into a assisted living facility, so managing all of that. I got another who's buying a house, managing all of that.
Right.
And so it's just recognizing that, what, we'll figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody's doing the best they can. We'll figure it out. And, we'll get done what we need to get done.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. For anyone doing anything, really. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like to wrap up with some maybe funner questions. So what are you watching? Funner. That's a
funner
word. Yeah.
Okay.
Interview we're doing here. What are you binge watching right now?
We're watching The Newsroom right now.
Okay.
I've binge watched a couple of series with the RAF, Piece of Cake and Wings.
Ooh.
And I've got one or two others kind of in the hopper. I'm rediscovering some of the great miniseries that the BBC have put on over the years too.
Cool.
But Newsroom, and then I'll figure out what comes after Newsroom.
I like it. What's your go-to quarantine snack?
Chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, okay. All right.
I hesitate to admit that, but yes, I need to do better.
No. Particular brand?
Chips Ahoy, man.
Chips Ahoy. Okay. Classic.
Although I'm not too picky. A good chocolate chip cookie is a good chocolate chip cookie.
I know. I cannot decide. I think I'm more of like a salty snack person, but been baking a lot. So.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, Chris Kolakowski, thank you so much for sitting down with us. I really appreciate it. And
my pleasure.
Our viewers get some valuable insights from this conversation.